Yeah, good morning, everyone. So here I am back with the third part of the revision videos for the nervous system. In this part of the chapter, we'll be basically focusing on the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and the reflex actions. So let us get started with peripheral nervous system first. Now, as far as the term suggests, periphery means it is like connecting the outer regions or the kind of the boundaries, okay, of your body with the central nervous system. So this is like, just for example, we have a central government, and if the authorities from the central government wish to communicate with some local administration, so no one from the central government will himself or herself come down directly to have a communication. Okay, there will be some channel through which that communication takes place. So likewise, the brain and the spinal cord, which are the components of our central nervous system, in order to communicate with the different parts of the body, the communication happens through a channel that is called as the nerves. So we have two sets of nerves, the cranial nerves that arise from the brain and the spinal nerves that arise from the spinal cord. Now, there are in all 12 pairs of cranial nerves. I repeat, there are in all 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Some of them can be sensory, some of them are motor, and some of them are mixed nerves. An example of a sensory nerve is the one that arises from the eyes and carries the impulses to the brain. That is called as the optic nerve, or the nerve arising from our ears and carrying the impulses to the brain again. That is the auditory nerve. So these are two nerves which are examples of sensory nerves. Then we have a motor nerve. Motor nerves is the one in which the fibers carry the impulses from the CNS to the effector organs, that is to the muscles or to the glands. So the example of the easiest example to remember for this will be the nerve that supplies to the muscles of the eyeball, that is responsible for the rotation of the eyeball. So the nerve is called as oculomotor nerve. That's an example of motor nerve. And then you have mixed nerve. The easiest example to remember is the one that supplies to the tongue. Now, the tongue being as a muscular organ, but it is also a sensory organ. It helps us to sense taste, and it can also be moved because it is made up of muscles. So the nerve taking impulses from the tongue and bringing impulses from the CNS to the tongue is an example of the mixed nerve. So these are the cranial nerves. So cranial nerves are 12 pairs in number. They arise from the brain, different regions of the brain, and they are basically either sensory, motor, or mixed in nature. Now, when we talk about the spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Okay, 8 pairs of spinal nerves that arise from the cervical region. 8 pairs, I repeat. 12 pairs of spinal nerves from the thoracic, so that makes 20. Then 5 pairs each from the lumbar and the sacral region, so that makes it 30 pairs. And 1 pair of spinal nerve from the coccygeal region, so that makes 31 pairs. Now, every spinal nerve is an example of a mixed nerve. I repeat, every spinal nerve is an example of a mixed nerve. So now let us have a brief overview or a brief look into the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves very quickly. Okay, so what we see highlighted in pink here currently are all the cranial nerves. So as far as the cranial nerves are concerned, these are the ones that arise from the different regions of the brain. So if I can just actually fade the others. So you can see here clearly, there are about 12 pairs of nerves that arise from the different regions of the brain, and majority of them will seem to arise from the medulla oblongata basically. Okay, so that we'll study in detail in higher classes in grade 11 and grade 12. But right now in grade 10, you need to remember that there are about 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Some of them are sensory, some of them are motor, and some of them are mixed nerves. Now, let us have a look at the structure of a spinal nerve in detail. Now here you can see the spinal nerves that are all highlighted in the pink. They're spread all over the body. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that arise from different regions of the spinal cord, which I've already mentioned to you all a while ago. Now let us go ahead and have a detailed look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, the structure of the spinal nerve, and also the reflex arc. As far as the reflex arc is concerned, it is the shortest route taken by an impulse from the receptor to the effector. I repeat, the reflex arc is the shortest route taken by an impulse from the receptor to the effector. So let us have a look at the structure of the transverse section of the spinal cord, the reflex arc, as well as the spinal nerve. So what you see here is a diagram of the transverse section of the spinal cord and the reflex arc. Now, as we had already seen in the previous video, that in the transverse section, the spinal cord also shows two regions, but the arrangement of the white and the gray matter is opposite to that of the brain, and that is cerebrum and cerebellum. In cerebrum and cerebellum, the gray matter was on the outer side while the white matter was inside. Here it is the reverse. The white matter, which consists of the axons, is on the outside while the gray matter is on the inside. The gray matter is roughly in the form of a H-shaped structure basically. And in the center of the gray matter, you see a small central canal, which is in continuity with the ventricles of the brain. And the central canal is also filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, as you all can see here, the spinal nerve has two branches, the dorsal root and the ventral root. The two roots fuse together to form the spinal nerve. As you can see, that you have two different types of nerve tracts. One that is shown in purple is the tract of the sensory neuron, and the other that is shown in green is the tract of the motor neuron. So as far as the sensory neuron is concerned, it carries impulses from the receptor, like the cells in the skin, up to your CNS, that is, say for example, up to the gray matter of the spinal cord. Now the sensory neuron will continue into the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, enter the gray matter, and pass on the impulse to the association neuron or the interneuron. That association neuron or the interneuron receives the incoming sensory impulse, analyzes it, interprets it, and generates an outgoing motor impulse. So the motor impulse is then carried by the motor neuron, which passes through the ventral root, emerges out, and supplies to the effector. So this is the shortest route from the receptor to the effector via the CNS, and this shortest route is called as the reflex arc. And the same is the structure for the transverse section of the spinal cord, as well as for the spinal nerve. So here you can see in the spinal nerve, there are two types of nerve tracts or nerve fibers. One kind of fibers are sensory in nature and the other type is motor in nature. And therefore, every spinal nerve is an example of a mixed nerve. I repeat, every spinal nerve is an example of a mixed nerve. So I hope you are clear with the explanation for the peripheral nervous system, which mainly includes the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Now let us shift our focus towards reflex action. I will not be describing the reflexes in brief, but just giving you a slight insight into the reflex action. There are two types of reflexes, something that you are born with, like for example, coughing, sneezing, blinking of the eyes, swallowing of food. These are all natural reflexes. They are called inborn or innate reflexes also. And the other type of reflexes are conditioned reflexes, which develop through a learning or through an experience during a lifetime. Like for example, say if you are playing football and you are acting as playing as a goalkeeper in the game, and if the striker of the opposite team strikes or kicks the ball towards the goal post, you will dive in that direction in order to prevent the goal from being scored. So this is a kind of a conditioned reflex. In short, if someone who does not know how to play football may not respond or may not try to prevent a goal from being scored, but someone who is well trained will definitely dive and try and prevent the ball from reaching up to the goal post. So that's a conditioned reflex. Or maybe say, for example, playing of a musical instrument. Someone who does not know how to play a guitar or a keyboard may not be able to do so, but someone who is well trained can enthrall the audience in an auditorium. So conditioned reflexes are definitely acquired through a learning experience during the lifetime. Now, reflexes can be simple reflexes, or they can also be involving multiple or complex pathways. So you can have reflexes which can be either simple reflexes, or sometimes they can be like complex. Now, simple reflexes generally involve only two neurons, a sensory and a motor neuron. And sometimes there can be a third neuron also. But generally, most reflexes are kind of compound or complex reflexes. They involve various nerves at different levels in the spinal cord. Like, for example, if you're playing, say, lawn tennis, and you have to run across the court to hit a particular kind of a shot, then that action involves stimulation from various spinal nerves at different levels in the spinal cord. So it is just not involving one particular reflex arc or one pathway. It will involve several pathways. I hope that is clear to you all. So I repeat again that certain reflex actions can be simple, that is, they just involve one particular pathway. But in most cases, there are several pathways that are involved together. So that is called as a complex reflex action. A reflex action or a reflex arc will always involve the following components. We'll have a receptor, in which you have the sensory cells that receive the stimulus and convert it into an impulse. Then you have a sensory neuron that will receive the nerve impulses and carry it towards the CNS. And you have an association neuron that receives the incoming sensory impulse, analyzes it, interprets it, and generates an outgoing motor impulse, which is then carried by the motor neuron. So motor neuron becomes your fourth component of the reflex arc. And then you have the effector, which is either a muscle or a gland that responds to the motor impulse. Okay, so these are the five main components of the reflex arc. I repeat again: the receptor, the sensory neuron, the association neuron. Okay, the association neuron is always found in the CNS, the central nervous system. Then you have the motor neuron, and then you have the effector. So these are, in short, the components of the reflex arc or the reflex pathway. Now let us shift our focus to the autonomic nervous system. What you see highlighted in pink here are the nerves associated with the autonomic nervous system. Now, as far as the autonomic nervous system is concerned, the autonomic nervous system, as the name suggests, autonomous. So autonomous means it is the one that is independently functioning. It's an independent division, basically. So just as we have the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, we also have the autonomic nervous system. Now, as far as the autonomic nervous system is concerned, it has two main divisions, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, as far as the nerves of the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system are concerned, they arise from the spinal cord in the region between the neck and the waist. I repeat, they arise from the spinal cord in the region between the neck and the waist. Whereas, as far as the parasympathetic nervous system is concerned, the nerves of the parasympathetic system either arise from above the neck or below the waist region. So I would just shortly highlight the nerves of the parasympathetic nervous system as well. So as you all can see here, the parts that are highlighted in pink, they are the regions that are located anteriorly above the neck. And you also have another region that is posteriorly below the waist. These are the components, or these are the nerves of the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, these two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, that is sympathetic and parasympathetic, are opposite to each other in terms of function. The sympathetic nervous system is influenced by or stimulated by the hormone adrenaline that is secreted by the adrenal medulla. The adrenal gland, we know, is located right above the kidneys, and the medulla region, that is the inner region of the adrenal gland, releases the hormone adrenaline, which stimulates or controls or regulates the functioning of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, as far as the functions of the sympathetic nervous system are concerned, they are exactly the same as the hormone adrenaline. So they can increase or accelerate heart rate, increase the breathing rate, reduce the blood supply to the skin and the internal organs, increase blood supply to your muscles, cause dryness of mouth, then increase the secretion of tears, cause piloerection, or in layman's term, you can call it as goose flesh or goosebumps. And overall, it kind of prepares your body for some kind of an immediate action. Whereas parasympathetic system helps your body to again return back to the original state after that emergency situation is passed over. So once an individual passes through that emergency situation and the conditions are now normal in the surrounding, then the parasympathetic nervous system will help the individual or the body to return back to the normal state. So it will slow down the heart rate, slow down the breathing rate. It will dilate the blood vessels all over the body. Then except the coronary arteries, of course, which will be constricted under the influence from parasympathetic system. Then the blood supply to the internal organs will increase. The urinary bladder will now kind of again the sphincters that are present in the urinary bladder, they will again relax. So there's an urge to micturate or urinate. Then there will be constriction of the pupil of the eyes. Then salivation increases. The secretion of tears is inhibited. So these are, in short, the effects of the parasympathetic system, which are exactly contradictory or opposite to the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. So these two, sympathetic and parasympathetic, are antagonistic to each other in terms of their function. So this, in short, is about the autonomic nervous system, basically. So in short, sympathetic system prepares your body for some kind of an immediate action, whereas the parasympathetic system will prepare your body to again come back to the original state after the emergency is complete. So this concludes the part of nervous system, my dear friends. And the next video that I'll shortly upload will include the revision of the structure of the eye and the ear. Thank you, everyone. Continue watching and continue liking the channel.